Sup you beautiful people? Hope you've had a fantastic day. Welcome back to a brand new episode of What If Deku Awakens Adrenaline. Izuku fought like hell at the games against Todoroki. What if he fought even harder? What if he learned of something new within his quirk that empowered him through pain and helped him shape a new style of fighting, of life and of thinking about heroics? One of his own, one that he could control, one that he could wield and shape to its full potential. If you guys enjoyed this what if, comment down below and let me know. And go ahead and check out other what ifs in the channel. After watching this video, don't forget to shower some appreciation onto the incredible author responsible for this fanfiction. The link is conveniently waiting for you in the description down below. Before we get into it though, don't forget to subscribe and leave a like, and also share this video with your friends. So let's start this video. Was it possible to feel lonely in a quirked world? In a world populated by those who could fly of their own volition, of people able to manipulate the very fabric of the world, of men and women who could shift their genetic makeup at will, of a world where extra limbs or extra body parts were common. Could something as simple as loneliness, a problem so easily solved by companionship and kindness, even exist? Yes, it did. Quietly tapping his fingers atop the wooden desk, Izuku could hear the faint echoes bounce and dash around the room. How his mind had wandered onto this topic, he couldn't really know. Nothing too serious had happened to make him question the foundation of society. Nothing to make him accuse the quirked world of a serious crime, or even ponder its meaning in general. Nothing too out of the ordinary had happened to make him think these things, so why was he? Glancing down at his fidgeting fingers, he began to spy the bandages bound tightly around his arms, snaking their way down his flesh like linen serpents that constricted and suffocated his dead and crippled flesh away from society. Maybe that was why he began to think. These scars, the ones the bandages were hiding from the world, were caused by his quirk, the power passed on to him by another person without blood or heritage involved. In that case, he was isolated alongside All Might and all the other one for all users, trapped within the stigma and the gross oversimplification of the world, that their combined and crystallized power couldn't and shouldn't be possible. It was a secret that they must all keep to their graves, for it put the very world into scale that they would not be able to escape from if the truth came out. In that way, he was lonely, not being allowed to share and talk about his secret to those that cared so much about his well-being. Deep down though, he knew it wasn't that. In that circumstance, he still wasn't completely alone, and he had others that could understand what he was going through, others that he could relay his feelings to, like Recovery Girl and even All Might himself. Others that had to go through all the same crap that he was going through now. In fact, for them, in a world growing accustomed to the mere idea of powers and innate abilities built within the human genome, it must have been far harder. So, it wasn't that which made him ponder. It could have been the unrelenting weight pushed upon him by the acceptance of the quirk. Even the users which had come before him hadn't had the ideology of All Might pushed upon them, the position of the symbol of peace thrust upon them. Yes, they had readily accepted the quirk and the powers it granted, but to his knowledge, the man who had gifted it to him personally had managed to rise throughout the hero's society with it. It was to such a degree that the very island of Japan seemed to wish him success, while droves of people prayed to this modern, super-powered god. And Izuku had to live up to that? The teen had previously been drowning in worry and desire for the man's quirk that he hadn't really thought about the aftermath of his actions. And so he was now sitting here, the very fate of the hero community in his shaky, scarred hand. In that aspect, he truly was alone. Even then though, there were people like Todoroki and Bakugo who were pushing themselves against hell and heaven to reach the number one spot too, against forces like Endeavor and fate itself. So even the impossible odds put before him were shared by others like him. Then perhaps it was the nature of his quirk. Adrenaline. Its very foundation was pure agony, pure fury. That to exert even the slightest amount of power, a sacrifice must be made on the part of the user, a toll paid in blood to unleash massive amounts of built-up energy and force on top of the power granted by one for all. Truly, it was a magnificent side effect, maybe even a whole other quirk if pushed to its limit. But that is where the ideologies of the future and the ideologies of society clashed. When Izuku was younger, he used to watch All Might fight villains all the time, watched All Might save people, watched All Might bat away problems like they were nothing, and he completely idolized him. Still does, but the main reason why was because he seemed indestructible. Everything he did with a smile that showcased his power and strife, that showed how he wasn't at all scared of death or chaos. That was why Izuku and so many others looked up to him. But how would he be able to be that for the next generation when every attack he gave off, every time he jumped in to save someone, he would have to bleed? The very act showed how weak he truly was, that he wasn't able to save himself, let alone a hostage or someone in danger. That was where he was alone. Loneliness. It wasn't the first time he had felt it. Being quirkless had its downsides, and now he was truly embraced. Deku, jolting up from the impact of the verbal bullet, Izuku suddenly recalled where he was, being interrogated by his friends in their classroom. Almost immediately, his skin felt hot and raw, stained scarlet from the intensity of the glares he was receiving. Surrounding him sat the impatient forms of Uraraka, Mina, Ida, Kirishima, and Toru. Ida and Uraraka he understood, they all walked to the station together, but Mina, Kirishima, and Toru didn't make much sense. But considering his situation, he wasn't in much position to be questioning those around him. His guess was that the invisible heroine was walking home with the pink-skinned teen, who was staying behind to figure out why her teammate suddenly become a literal bloody superhuman during their training session, and the hardening hero was in a similar position. Vaguely, Izuku began to quickly recall how he ended up in this predicament. After his fight with Kirishima and Satu, he had begun to feel lightheaded and dizzy, and so tried to get back to the waiting room as quickly as possible. Before he did, he tried to ignore the prying questions from Uraraka and Mina while helping up his opponents up, which not only left him in hot water with them for not responding in the right way, but also under the gaze of the red-headed individual he helped, who suddenly became very interested in how his quirk operated. By the time he got back to the waiting room, he had to deal with the staring and the open-mouthed responses from most of his classmates before Aizawa pretty much forced the class to continue. He had provided Izuku with the bandages to cover his arms, gifted to him by Recovery Girl because she knew how reckless and uncontrollable the teen was at this point in his training. However, he soon realized that his mechanic limb was missing, discarded at the training grounds. This was before he looked over at a certain Uravati to see the device gripped tightly between her fingers. He recalled trying to persuade her to give him the device back, saying that he was going to explain everything, but Uraraka wouldn't bring herself to give it back, instead telling him to come back to their classroom after school in order to retrieve it. That was when he was confronted by the 5 people in the room right now and practically forced to sit down. Sorry. Blanked out for a few minutes. What were you talking about, Uraraka? She sighed, and out of the corner of his eye, he saw the pacing girl's fists tighten ever so slightly. Well, Izuku, I asked you if you would mind explain what the hell happened just now. Izuku. Not Deku, Izuku. To merely hear that coming out of her mouth hurt him a little bit. She was the one to stand up for his degrading nickname, the one that made the pain he felt from Bakugo's usage worth it. The one who successfully changed his label as outcast to something that meant he was able to stand up against the very world itself. The one who stood by him. To hear her ignore that showcased her anger and her fury at this situation, how he was acting reckless and out of character when it came to this whole problem. He was usually so calculated, so meticulous in his decisions, but instead, he was just stumbling about like a child hooked up to overwhelming power. He wasn't in control at this point, and she and everyone else in the room had seen that. Tugging on his bandages, Izuku grit his teeth, smashing the pieces of cartilage against each other violently as he vowed to better himself once again. He was going to fight so that Deku would be the only thing he would be viewed as. The person who could rise up against difficulty and shatter any pathetic visages placed before him, and not the one who wore that title unceremoniously. Turning his gaze towards the worried girl's face, the teen tried to steel himself so that he could face her honestly, and not just implode with embarrassment or fear of disappointment. I was trying to figure out how to best use the new aspect of my quirk. He heard the girl's shuffling and pacing pause. Huh? What's that supposed to mean? This time, the question posed came from Kirishima. Tearing his eyes from Uraraka's skittering frame, he looked the confused crimson head in the eye, tracing the rough scar that lay there with his mind to distract himself momentarily. His quirk, duh. We did tell you about it, right? On the other end of the classroom, Mina started off her sentiment very high and might, almost arrogant, before quickly descending into worry and anxiety when she recalled past events. Past events that Izuku wasn't present for, and so had no proper say in this interaction, instead biding his time highlighting things in his head to avoid the poignant and debilitating stare of his rosy-cheeked friend. Nope. He was off doing stuff with Bakugo when we told the others. Toru answered off quite happily, the high-pitched voice erupting from the other end of the room as the chalk began to mysteriously doodle on the blackboard. The pink-skinned teen sighed. Why didn't you tell me sooner, Toru? Why? It wasn't important. If you reckon me looking sort of dumb is not important. What did you say, Mina? Ugh, forget it. From the side of the room, Ida finally decided to make his part in the conversation. Standing up in front of the group, the soft tapping of metal as the teen moved over to stand next to Izuku, the speedster's overwhelming form towering over the much shorter Quirk inheritor. We understand your conviction, Izuku. It's what makes you. You. However, what we do not understand is why you would require so much potential harm to activate it. As always, Ida was very straightforward with a sort of harsh, blunt honesty that threatened to break Izuku's skull once more, but now there was something else hidden below his language. Glancing up at the teen, the green-haired boy found his mind tilted at what he saw. Ida was perfectly still. Usually, he was quite active, always jittering and moving his arms that it seemed he was almost physically impossible to become still, but here he was, statuesque. Izuku couldn't see his eye either, the strong glare from his glasses reflecting the setting sun that sat behind the teens. This was strange. Well, ever since my fight with Todoroki, my quirk seems to have taken on some new attributes that weren't there before. Like, do you remember how some people thought their quirk was something completely different to what it actually was? Water manipulation was actually the ability to condense and transmute the oxygen in the air to be more like water due to the presence of more hydrogen atoms, stuff like that. He paused. He had been rambling again. Lifting his head up from the desk, he saw Ida standing before him, nodding his head in complete understanding while the other four were still quite confused. Uraraka seemed to understand most of it. It was the whole science aspect of it that she seemed to lose attention on. He couldn't see Tura, but the fact that he doodling had slowly become more and more shaky until it was now just a selection of shaky lines had answered his questions, and Mina and Kirishima were looking at each other in morbid confusion, twirling their fingers around each other while looks of perplexing origin consumed their faces. It took a while before said pink-skinned girl managed to speak again. Jay, just think of it as thinking your quirk is water generation when it's more water manipulation. At this, everyone seemed to pick it back up once more. So then, what's this new, awesome quirk of yours then? Kirishima had asked a very valid question. For all they knew, his powers were the exact same due to the common acceptance of mystery around Izuku's original strength enhancement, but now that was being thrown out the window by the user themselves. So, what was it? It was here where Izuku began to fret. He didn't have a cover story ready for this. Before, when he just had the base quirk of One for All, it was quite easy to cover it up as being a separate strength quirk due to the complete variation in appearance whenever he and All Might unleashed an attack. This was now due to their side effects, but he had not known this at the time, and even now, it was actually very simple to cover up. All Might could not use pain inflicted onto him to power up his attacks after all. It was just the fact that he had to come up with the cover-up in such a short amount of time. Well, before it was just a simple strength enhancement quirk. A mass collection of power that I was able to summon at will, with the side effect of the uncontrollable nature being the damage I received after the fact. Now though. And now it's more of my body attack itself in order to build up energy, damaging my nerves and receptors for a short amount of time with the energy given off from the start of my quirk. When my skin starts to get hot, then that pain generates more energy than at the initial activation, as pain is what brings about the energy required for the output, and so I can use it in a punch in my arms, or I can use it in my legs to travel really long distances quickly at the cost of breaking the bones or tissue in the area that the quirk is used in. Fortunately though, the energy also activates a larger amounts of blood cells which clot the skin wounds and heal them at a much faster rate, while my bones are helped by an influx in chondroblasts which heal them faster. Glancing up from his rambling, he hoped that he had explained it to a degree to not only convince them all of his quirk. What he received in turn were stares that made him question if he was even speaking English. Even Ida looked slightly confused. In retrospect, my body requires pain as a stimulus to generate mass amounts of energy that fuel my body before releasing addition cells to help with recovery for a short time afterwards. Sighing. Izuku thought that he was free before he was leapt at by Kirishima, the hardening hero visibly envy at the newest discovery presented to him by the green-haired teen. Whoa! That is so cool! You have to hurt yourself in order to use your quirk? That is so manly! Clapping Izuku on the back with a wide and toothy grin, the inheritor couldn't help but replicate it. It's also really stupid and really dangerous. Glancing ahead of him and away from the spiky-haired teen, Izuku let out a small sigh at the sight of Uraraka. Her eyes were filled with fury and anger, laced with bouts of annoyance and confusion, but the words that managed to roll off her tongue contained no malice and no hate, only care and comfort. All in all, it was a very confusing picture that, while settling the picture of a distraught and perplexed girl in the teen's mind, also made him contemplate his own situation. He had made her feel all these things, made her do this because of his messed up quirk. Looking her in her eye, Izuku was about to speak up when a loud cough and the hard tapping of shoes filled the air. Now that's all fine and dandy, right? But please indulge dear Izuku. What the hell do you need with this thing then? Practically skipping towards the group, who had unanimously decided to congregate around the Izuku's desk for whatever reason, Mina was accompanied by the faint sound of hollow metal as she moved. Following the noise to its origin, Izuku suddenly found his skin growing hot in embarrassment, and under the heated glare of a certain gravity girl, her entire form somehow being consumed in a comforting rage as the pink-skinned girl near them. In her hand, Mina was carrying his mechanical limb, his device, his scarsuit. Sucking in a breath at the badly worded and really bad name, the teen looked at it as the handle jingled and shook around, clashing with the metallic frame of the device as it did and creating the ominous noise emanating from the girl's grasp. When she got near enough, she placed the spindly frame on the desk, wiping off her hands on her skirt before placing them on her hips and turning to Izuku with a look of playful terror in her eyes, knowing what this would mean for him purely from the look on his face. Go on then, what's this thingamajig do for your quirk? Staring down at the mechanical structure, Izuku relented as he picked it up. So, when I was explaining my quirk, I told you all that my body needed pain to act as a stimulus for my quirk, that it allowed the release of energy which would then be used in my limbs as a source of power. I also explained that this stimulus can come from my own body, with a sort of precursor energy activating alongside it to provide pain initially so that the after effects and the primary source of energy can be used. However, at this point I don't know if that will do anything long term. I don't know if it'll damage me internally, even with the additional cells helping the recovery, or if it might damage me mentally. Think of this source of quirk activation as what happened at the Yui Games, during my fight with Todoroki and how I sort of lost it. Gazing up at his impromptu audience to make sure that they were still following, he was met with a few small nods from Kirishima and Ida, showing that they were at least following this part of the explanation, but Mina and Uraraka reacted differently. Both appeared to be flustered at the mere mention of that fight, with said southern girl gaining a thick coat of red dusting her entire form as she avoided eye contact with his entire person, while Mina was staring straight at him, lost in a swirl of lilac as she just lost herself to whatever she was thinking. Whatever had them up in arms, he couldn't tell, so Izuku just continued his talk. Anyways, the source that activates my quirk can also be external rather than internal, meaning that my body doesn't potentially suffer any psychological or internal damage that I am completely unaware of. Instead, if I am able to deal a significant amount of damage to myself with something on the outside or like a knife or just sheer damage to my body, I am able to use my quirk. This is just a rough prototype that I was testing out. The spines on the sides stab my skin just enough to generate the energy needed to use my quirk without seriously damaging my body. At the minute, it's the safest thing to do. Glancing down at the skeleton before him, Izuku began to outline it and look upon how it could be altered. Even in its short time of use, the metal coating had to scratch off, revealing the twisting frame below it in all of its rustic glory, while patches of dried crimson dotted the length of the appendage, complementing the dull sheen of silver that lay across it. In a way, it mirrored how Izuku's own life and attitude was panning out. He had only acquired adrenaline a short time ago, and it had changed his future and his mindset exponentially, made him feel more alive and freer than ever while still chaining him to a harmful ideology that he knew was bad for him. This power that lay dormant inside of him had heightened his desire for being a hero, his want and strive for becoming someone of such a high caliber that it only managed to push him past all of his quirk's downsides. He could fight through the pain if it meant it could give back to everyone in his life, to All Might for giving him his quirk, to his mom for supporting him and helping him all his life, to his friends for being there and pushing him to rise above it all, and he could do all of that with his own power, with some that kept true to the value of All Might while still giving him a personal touch and patch of freedom. However, at the same time, it brought forth all of those thoughts from earlier, about how it made him unfit to have the mantle of the symbol of peace. At this point, Izuku couldn't tell if he was overreacting to this and just worrying over nothing or if this was a genuine concern. With his quirk being in its infancy, he was unable to gauge how others would view it, but it was a concern that had trapped Izuku in a vice-like grip of worry that he just couldn't shake. Adrenaline truly was a double-edged sword, no doubt about it. Are you sure that this is the safest option, Izuku? I mean, I don't want to be rude or anything, but looking at your arms I'm not so sure. Hearing a soft, sweet voice by his ear accompanied by light breaths hitting the shell of his ear made the teen recoil in shock before figuring out that Tura had moved from her position from the blackboard, instead coming over to listen to his mumbling about his quirk. At the same time, she was softly running her invisible hand down his arm, smoothing over his bandages and the wounds inflicted by his quirk in a calm, comforting manner that allowed him to understand her feelings. Didn't mean he wasn't embarrassed and nervous at the thought of having any kind of girl this close to him. A, at this stage, why yeah? I may H have to be used bandages a lot, B, but compared to what the fight against Todoroki did to me, this truly is the best option. Without thinking, his scarred and damaged fingers crept up to the back of his skull, contorting and stretching around the cracks and fragmentations that lay there as a result of the fight, and the foolish actions he performed while under adrenaline's influence. Suddenly, his thought process was interrupted when a heavy hand hit his shoulder and forced him out of his head. Slowly turning his gaze up to where the impact came from, Izuku's brow soon became furrowed at the sight of Ida. His eyes turned to the ground. Ida? Izuku, I think that you should reconsider using your quirk in this manner. Looking ahead at his friend quizzically, he soon found that the stares of everyone else in the room followed to the tall hero in training. What did you mean, man? He just explained that he can't really use it without risking himself. Shoving his hands in his pockets, Kirishima began to lean against the desk in front of Izuku's, offering Ida his own perplexed view on the matter, unable to figure out why the teen would want to stop Izuku from using his quirk. I only mean that he should try and maneuver around this aspect of his quirk and use it like he used to. You mean using it to the point where it broke his bones? You sure about that, Ida? That is not what I am insinuating. Only that. Next up was Mina, offering her own point on the situation, providing a flaw to their speedster friend and his way of thinking. As she was talking, Izuku was just thinking, why would Ida be so against this idea? He had seen how he acted with his quirk before, so him hurting himself wasn't a new topic. Maybe it was the idea of prolonged exposure to pain would change him, that he wouldn't want to improve or better guarantee his own safety due to the power it offered him? No, it wasn't that. Glancing down at his damaged hands on the desk, he turned it so the palm was tilted towards him. There was another layer to this. Biting his lip, his eyes turned upwards to meet Uraraka's, the girl just as confused as he was. It was to the point where her anger and fury had subsided, replaced by complete confusion. Staring at her, Izuku began to think about what could have happened in the last few weeks that could have. He understood. This is about your brother, isn't it? All conversation ceased existence as soon as Izuku spoke up. Everyone turned their eyes towards him, but the teen was only focused on Ida and his reaction. He was silent for a few seconds before letting out a heavy sigh and turning towards his friend with a heavy expression in his eyes. I saw Tensei's body, Izuku. It was broken and beat up, so bloody that it made me want to gag. That was my brother. That was the pro-hero Igenium right there, destroyed in a matter of seconds. To me, that is what you are proposing we let happen to you. That we stand by and let you destroy yourself for the sheer purpose of being a hero. Subconsciously, Izuku squinted his eyes. Stand by? No, Ida, I just wanted to tell you why I need this device and anything like it in the future. Tomorrow, I'm meeting up with May again so that we can work on costume ideas to better get my quirk under control. If you want to talk to me about anything, do it. But you know that I can't just stop being a hero. It is that determination that scares me. My brother was the same way. He wanted to help everyone no matter the cost. Be a great hero that made people smile no matter the cost. Just like you. And after everything that has happened with this hero killer, I'm scared that one day I will be back in that hospital, looking at you in that hospital bed, all because of your own quirk. This type of care and comfort had rarely been directed at Izuku, so at the minute, he felt overwhelmed. However, that didn't mean that he couldn't argue his point. Ida was trying to have him stop using this part of his quirk, the part that he felt so conflicted about, for his own sake. Yes, it was so that he and others wouldn't see Izuku beaten and battered, but that was their job as heroes, to take the damage that others couldn't. In an act of selfishness, the quirk inheritor shot back at Ida. Ida, thank you so much for your concern, but you have to understand that this is all I've ever wanted. As heroes, we have to be ready to put our lives on the line for other people, and even if I have to put myself at risk to even use my quirk, that is worth it if I'm able to save one person. My quirk, while not invincible, can help me bounce back from any damage I receive. I understand not to overuse it and rely too much on it, but it will help me. I am not trying to be insensitive here, Ida. I really am, and it's out of respect for you and your brother. but I am not Igenium. The room seemed to freeze over slightly as Izuku spoke those last 3 words. It may have sounded harsh, especially coming out of someone like Izuku, but it was something that needed to be said. Locking eyes for a few seconds, Iida soon dropped. Then, he slung his bag around his shoulder and began to make his way to the door, but before he did, he managed to say one thing. "Neither am I, Izuku. Neither am I." Watching him about to leave, the teen tried to stand up, to get Iida back here to talk instead of just letting him leave and wallow. He was stopped by an invisible force, however, as Tura pulled him back in the same soft, calm manner that she had spoken to him with earlier. It was quite a departure from her bubbly, over-the-top self, but something told Izuku that this was more real than that was. Despite not being able to see her, the boy turned around to where his face would be and looked there with peril and regret in his eye. "Let him go for now, Izu. He just needs this time to think. He'll be fine soon, but for now, just let him be." Too engrossed in worry for his friend to notice the new nickname applied to him, Izuku just nodded and returned to his seat, head turned towards the wooden surface. Silence crept around the room for a few minutes before the loud beeping of a phone went off, alerting everyone to its presence. Kirishima was the source. Pulling out his phone, he looked through it quickly before sucking on his teeth. "Damn. Listen, I've gotta bolt it, but thanks for telling me, Izuku. It helped me understand a little bit more. I'll be ready the next time we fight, got it?" Smirking slightly at the challenge, the teen nodded at his red-haired friend, earning a dry smile in return. Picking up his bag, Kirishima was about to leave but took one look at the group of 4 one last time before dashing out and jogging down the hallway to leave. Now that he thought about it, Izuku realized that they had been here for some time, with pretty much everyone else in the building having already left. He was distracted for some time before being coaxed back in by a cough right in front of him. "So then, Izuku." Looking up, the green-haired boy could audibly hear himself gulp at the glare he received in return, the intensity of which seemed to set the very room on fire. Uraraka was standing there, cross-armed and a pout adorning her face as she stared him down. She may have been trying to be more aggressive, seem angry and annoyed at what he just said, but instead he could just focus in on how her brow twitched alongside her mouth as she tried to remain stoic. To be honest, Izuku found it quite cute. "Uraraka, I can't just give up because of what my quirk is. Yes, it is dangerous, and yes, I understand the risks that it entails, but I want to be a hero and now I can be. I told you I was a late bloomer, so I haven't had the 10+ years all of you have had to train and get accustomed to it. No, I have to work harder to make sure that I don't lose control and end up hurting someone else with it. To make sure that whoever I save can be comfortable if I come to help them. Work harder to make everyone proud." Gazing back down towards his desk, Izuku could hear the sigh that emanated from Uraraka's mouth. Too scared of the reality of the situation, of having his dream rejected again like it had been so many times before, he didn't even look up from his desk, the desk which housed his beaten, bloody hands. They sat comfortably under bandages and curls of linen, hiding them away from the rest of the world, and even though he was unsure of his purpose, unsure of whether he could become the symbol of peace in this state, he was sure that he would try his damn near hardest to make that dream possible, and no longer have it squandered and shot down by those around him. Now, he would live for his own dream. Quietly, he heard the faint tapping of shoes across the wooden classroom floor until they stopped in front of his desk, and he watched in content and confused silence as the table bent slightly under the unexpected weight of another person, of Uraraka. Glancing up to meet her, he saw a comforting softness to her face which hadn't been there for some time. Calmly the girl began to move her tiny hand towards his, the size of his dwarfing hers, until she clasped her shut around his flesh. Undeterred by his confusion, she resumed running her fingers up and down the warm piece of linen. "Izu no, Deku. I can't promise that I know how you feel, and I can't say that I completely support this silly mindset of yours. But the way you smiled just now, when you talked about your dream, it made me realize that I can't say that I hate the idea or say that I should be angry at you for your decision, because I cannot bring myself to be any of those things." Leaning forward, she took more of his hand into hers and began to wordlessly undo the bandages, letting them drop to the desk with a soft thud. Then, the southern girl pulled and pushed the cat-like pads on her fingers across his numerous scars and scratches with reckless abandon. "We care for you, Deku. You need to remember that. We care for you so much that when we saw you jump into action today, when we heard you scream and shout, our hearts began to beat like crazy, and we didn't know if you were really alright or not. I was so scared for you." Pulling herself closer, she enveloped Izuku's top half in a tight hug, holding him closer to her chest while he froze, scarlet coating his entire form. "Please just be careful, okay?" "Why yes, sure." In the few seconds that she was holding him, Izuku could feel all the care and warmth that Uraraka felt towards him. It was like nothing else he had ever felt. He had never truly felt that much attention and worry for him from someone that wasn't his mother, and that in itself was enough to make him emotional. But it was more than that. It was that she was able to show this to him without speaking it. She could, and it would work, but she didn't have to. No, Uraraka could do it. Make him feel like this without words, and that meant so much to him. "Alright, lovebirds, let's get moving or Aizawa will chew us out for being here so long after school hours." Shooting away from each other, Izuku and Uraraka grew thick red blushes on both of their faces as they turned to see Mina's wide and sly grin adorning her pink face. Alongside her, Tura's clothes swayed and moved in spirals to show her impatient attitude as her bag, covered in colors and different stickers, swung around with her. Sighing, Izuku pushed himself away from his desk and grabbed his small yellow bag while Uraraka moved to grab her own bag. Offering each other one final smile, the two turned to their friends with an expected gaze. "Well, HM? Oh yeah. Do you mind if we walk with you guys? We sort of got ditched talking to you guys," Tura replied, the same bubbly tone present in her voice. It made Izuku pause. Now that he had been exposed to that softer, calmer side of her, this happier, over-the-top personality just seemed sort of off. It seemed more unnatural, something made up, but to be honest, he didn't know the girl enough to take that guess to heart, so just let her be for the minute. Sorry about that. Don't worry, muscles. Anyway, you owe us now, so you basically have to let us walk with you." Sticking her tongue out at the boy, Izuku couldn't help but sigh at Mina's interactions with him. Didn't stop him from turning a shade of brighter red though. Didn't help when Uraraka got involved. "Damn! She's really got us here, Izuku. Blackmail it is. See, can we just go please?" Ida's head rung. It was a deep pounding that smashed and crashed against the walls of his mind, colliding against the fleshy walls with a fierce brutality that manifested throughout the rest of his body. His hands were coiled in on themselves, nails gripping and digging into his hardened skin while he paced and dashed around the room he was confined in, locked like a prison he entered of his own free will. If the boy was to identify and relate the sensation to anything, he'd relate it to running with his quirk. A harsh jet of air would shoot out, ricocheting from wall to wall in a burst of energy and aggression that tore and ripped at his head in clean and precise shots. A rough pounding and dragging urge grated and splintered the floor of his mind, kicking and sprinting all over his fragile state with careless abandon and reckless authority. A shocking blast of explosive heat shattered and caused a cataclysmic retreat within Ida, ambition and pride drying out and shriveling up as they lay dying, bathing in pride. Guilt and pride. That was all Ida's mindset boiled down to. Every key state, every emotion and action could be traced back to the all-consuming status of pride that ate away at his spirit, or the sickening companionship that guilt granted him, absorbing and indoctrinating the teen into a deprived cycle of shamed friendship. Even now, the trainee hero could feel the pulsing and breathing heart of his quirk shudder and shake, rattling and flaring up against the fabric of his clothing like. Now that Ida heard it, the shallow palpitations and shuddering sounded like a wounded creature, like a dying animal. It sounded as if his quirk was choking on his ambition, was being smothered by his guilt and forced to swallow his pride. Ida was the wounded animal, a sick and disturbed individual whose brain was eating itself as his body decayed into a mess of metal and flesh. However, deep inside, he knew he didn't have the right to feel this way, to feel hurt and injured. Not while his brother was sat right behind him. Stealing a breath from the air and forcing it inside himself, Ida turned from the open expanse of the hospital window and shifted back to meet the unopened gaze of his older brother. Tubes and wires prodded and branded Tensei, stabbing and draining him of the humanity he once held as a powerful and influential hero. To see him laying here, coddled in medical equipment, and cradled by the soft beeping of his heart monitor, robbed him of that humanity in a world where the definition of human no longer meant what it used to. It was no longer the straight line it once was. He was having the life and reason he built up for others snatched from him in a cruel instance of madness followed by machinery. Ida's rage and anger bubbled over, sinking and melting into the puddle that was his emotional state, mixing with his sadness and tragedy that overflowed his body. The boy could feel his body quake in self-destruction and terror, his teeth mash and grind together in fury and fear, his eyes narrow and sharpen in desolation and retreat. Yet he knew he could not blame the machinations that shackled Tensei here. In fact, the The slithering snakes of science that bit and injected his body with venom were some of the only things keeping him alive. No. The one to blame for his brother's suffering, for his brother's pain and absolution, for his brother's imprisonment was one man. A man plagued by the artificial tyranny of a villain, shrouded in the cloak of a hero. The hero killer, Stain. Eventually his brain overloaded, sparking and breaking as it was flooded by immediate thoughts of vengeance and retribution for his role model, to claw and claim back the life that was robbed from his brother. His eyes shook, leaking and brimming with tears as his hands gripped and dug into his shirt. Only the soft sound of quiet whimpering and the steady pulsing of the heart monitor echoed and shook throughout the room. Big brother, raise your head, Titania. Ida's eyes exploded open, his lids shooting into the excess of his skull. Cautiously, he glanced up. Staring back at him, face and body obscured by masks and repulsions of medicine, was the battered and smiling form of Tensei Ida. His eyes were lulled, his entire face looked tired and like well-worn stone, eroded, damaged and cracked by fatigue. His hair was matted by sweat and blood, staining his creed and attention with impurity. His mouth was chocked and caged in by a plastic prison that siphoned and drove air directly into his collapsed lungs. His body was restrained and regulated by foreign agents that stabbed and tore into his flesh with reckless abandon and unrelenting force. His legs. Ida did not dare look down at his legs, for it might entirely crush his spirit and damn his soul into subjugation if he even dwelled on the grievous wounds that fostered during Tensei's apocalyptic encounter. He was a mess, a complete and utter mess of a man, a mess of a hero. Shaking his head free of those insidious thoughts and breaking the branches of tears that streamed down his cheeks, Ida forced his brother a smile. "Hello, brother. I am very glad you are well." An exasperated sigh left Tensei's mouth, tiredness and pain oozing out through his breath. It was physically painful to watch Tensei move and act. Sucking in a breath, he tried to lean up, shoving his pillows below his stagnant form, before slowly rising up to meet his brother eye to eye. He barely made it a few seconds before he started spluttering into the insides of his mask, blood and spit fogging up the plastic. Panic sprang up over Ida's form, the teen dashing forward to help his relation. "Tensei, I'm I'm fine Tenya, sit back down." Pushing his body back against the steel railing, his breathing stilled with the rapid beating and pulsing of the heart monitoring shooting throughout the room. Sighing, Tensei shot back a strained smile to his younger brother. "So then Tenya, how's school been going for you this week? We haven't had much time to talk lately." Sucking in a breath he didn't know he had let go, Ida pushed a hand to his chest and sighed. Rounding the side of his brother's bed, he sat down on the wooden chair that sat there. "It is going very well, my brother. Everyone is just recovering from the sports festival, and the class seems to be in correct form." "Ah, well, that's very good. I've been catching up on a few of the fights after I woke up. You did really well, little brother. I'm proud of you." Suddenly, the tainted pride that had been eating away at Ida dispersed, instead being swallowed by a positive influence of pride. A large smile beamed on his face as he nodded at his brother. "Yeah, brother. Thank you very much. It is a great honor to be complimented by a hero of your caliber, brother. Well, ex-hero now, remember?" Suddenly a permafrost shrouds the room in cold. It was hard to breathe, the sudden exclamation of remembrance emerging in a horrid malformation of memory and forcing itself down each boy's throat, Tenya more than Tensei. Even after it had warmed up, even after the ice had thawed, making way for familiar conversation, Ida couldn't pull his head out of that statement. "So I'm not sure I've told you this yet, Tenya, but I met this really cool hero a couple of months ago. Smart guy too. His quirk was super unique. Something about gliding, I believe. Anyway, I met him when we were on a jog and it was..." Even as Ida nodded and motioned that he was listening, he wasn't. His head was numb. His mind was numb. His body was numb. Every word Tensei was spitting at him was just deflected by those words that cracked open his maw before. Ex-hero. Ex-hero. It just kept bouncing and shooting through his head like a rocket. His brother, the great and influential Ingenium, was no more. His empire of heroes would be passed on. His position as an amazing and incredible hero would be noted in the history books. His title would be relinquished. To hear him say it again, that he was paralyzed, meant that it was actually true and that it was a fact he had to face. Ingenium was dead, and he was supposed to be his successor. That very fact shook Ida so much that he almost felt like cracking, scattering his shattered shards all over his brother's feet. A testament to the complete and utter failure he would be as the next Ingenium. It shook and disturbed him, the amount of longing and trust that was being imbued into his legacy. Why was he being chosen to succeed, compared to so many others, people like Izuku and Uraraka and Bakugo and Todoroki? His achievements were minimal and his judgment poor. He may act brash and brazen, authoritarian and smart, but in reality, he was merely the shell of his brother and everything he had come to be. It was so maddening and so insane of an idea that Ida just couldn't comprehend it. And the entire reason all of this pressure, all of this judgment, all of this pain and suffering was being placed upon his family was all due to one sick and deranged man. Stain, gritting his teeth and clenching his fist around his leg, Ida's mind ignored all outward though and reason, all calling. Ida? He sacrificed his focus and logic of the current moment to dictate his reasoning and his attention on the hero killer completely. A mad psychopath that placed his brother in hospital and him doubting his place in society as a hero. A psychotic murder that trampled around Japan wreaking havoc on the innocent and the worthy. An absolute crazed maniac who feels as though his ideology and reasoning will triumph above those of the heroes. Ida? Ida's entire head swarmed and swam in the bloodlust of the hero killer, rivers and rivers of blood pouring and dashing throughout his skull just to cement the abominable and horrific acts of a man whose loyalties lay in the tactics of war and death. Stain reaps and commands death where he wishes and when he wishes, punishing those who would stand up to defend this country for what? Their bravery. Why did the actions of heroes not matter to Stain? Why did his brother's actions to Stain? Why will his actions not matter to Stay? Ida! A cool, calming force struck down on Ida's coiled fingers, the warm and comforting presence of family leaking deep into his bones. Releasing himself from his rage, Ida slowly turned his face towards his brothers, panic and shame shining deep within his eyes as he gazed towards Tensei. In response, his brother just gave a calm and collected smile. You haven't taken up the name yet, have you? Ida sighed. Tensei always had a trick to figure out what he was thinking. No, not yet, brother. Any particular reason why? He was poising a question, but from the tone of his voice, the brief sprinkles and dips of serenity that littered his tongue, it was as if he could assume what Ida's answer was going to be, that his brother would not able to take on the mantle just yet. Hanging his head, Ida just sighed. I just do not know if I'm ready yet. I'm still in school and it's so soon after your attack that I just don't think it'd be appropriate at this time. And then there's also TH. Midway through his rant, he heard another coarse sigh emerge out of Tensei. Then, in a swift movement, the same hand that had been used to calm and relax Ida's turbulent spirit jolted up to meet his head in a soft pat. It's okay, little brother, you still have plenty of time to become ingenium. Ruffling his hair, he offered his brother another kind and heartwarming smile, one which showcased the pure radiance and passion that Tensei housed for his brother and his future career as a hero. He understood the burden that heroic actions brought, the torturous acts and recklessness that the mind would wander to in tomes of pain and times where they were supposed to be strong. Sometimes Tensei even thought that maybe people forgot that heroes weren't just idols or advertisement or figureheads. That maybe they forgot that heroes were people too, and that people were allowed moments of weakness and strife as well as those they may protect. He knew that burden, and he understood that this is what awaited Tenya in the future. So, he needed to shelter his fall, even ever so slightly. Pulling his hand off of his brother's head, he continued speaking. Living up to the name of a pre-established hero can be tough, let me tell you. It's an uphill battle that throws rock after rock after rock at you, never ceasing, not even when you reach the top. However, there is always an advantage to being a successor. You get the equipment and the tips and the tools from the predecessor to help you with the tough bits, yeah? So, in time, when you're ready, I will teach you how to climb and give you the tools needed to become ingenium, Tenya. I promise. A moment of silence passed the two. Then, an emergent look of awe and joy overcame Ida's eyes, glazing over in the sheer relief and the sheer amount of pride that Tensei's words has imbued him with. The growth of corrupted pride that had earlier sat upon his heart had been cut away, its roots and branches torn from their sockets and left to burn. Now he felt renewed, he felt empowered, and he felt enlightened by this new discovery, and the lights of his very soul were set ablaze. Shooting his hands up to his face, Ida began to gesture and command the air like a conductor. Yes, brother! Thank you for your kind words and guidance. I will surely grow and become a far greater hero with your words and wisdom. Tensei let out a hoarse laugh. Whatever you say, Tenya, just don't forget to follow your own words now and again. Plus, if you aren't going to become ingenium anytime soon, maybe I can pick it back up. Ingenium, the wheelchair hero. Striking a dynamic and fluid pose as he moved, Tensei managed to elicit a few automated chuckles from his brother before his throat seized up and a riot of coughs and splutters shot up out of his mouth and all over his face mask. The harsh pings and clicks of the heart monitor bounced with disturbed excitement around the room to follow the tune of Tensei's suffering. Once again, panic broke through the flames within Ida, but a quick wave of his brother's arm paused his onslaught. The moment paused. The shuffling of cables and the creasing of plastic followed the agonizing smothering of Tensei's breath. Glancing downward at the floor, Ida's guilt began to eat away at him once more. Being able to do nothing while his brother sat suffering. There was nothing he could do, no great plan to eradicate the damage inflicted to him, no victorious charge to lead a revolution against the perpetrator, no anything. Then, sin galloped into Ida's mind. Although he couldn't relieve Tensei's agony, take away his suffering, he could still find the man who committed this pain. He could find and take down Stain himself. Fury and vengeance ran over the teen's body, digging their stained claws into his feeble flesh and shattered mind to puppeteer his body like a marionette. Turning towards Tensei, Ida spoke up once more. I have to go now, brother. I have school work I must complete for the due date. Tensei quirked an eyebrow, the finale of his coughing fit finally subsiding. HM? Well, okay then, little brother. Knowing you the due date probably isn't for a few weeks, is it, Tenya? Yes, you're right. Straining his head to look directly at his confused brother, Ida gave him a wide smile reminiscent of Tensei's own. But do not worry, brother. I will sort it out in time. However, to the man who so regularly gave out such smiles, something was off about his brothers. It was as if it had been warped, twisted and conjoined to some sickening part of fate that twirled and morphed the happiness on his face to rage. His teeth were grinding and mashing against one another in a way that seemed like a battle of cartilage. One set hammering down and bringing catastrophe to the ones below it, and his eyes were pulling against his skin, poking and dragging heavily along Ida's flesh in an uncontrollable and almost feral way. Something was off. Tensei just wasn't sure what. Pushing himself off the chair, the U-18 began to collect himself and compose his things. Every now and again, Tensei would catch him when his facade dropped, making way for an icy cold face of malice and torment that thawed and froze anything it looked at simultaneously, stranding everyone Ida looked upon in a blaze of burning cold. To what he was having such a heavy reaction to why he had to trap himself between a shell of ignorance and the true scale of his plummeting emotions, that fact was unfortunately lost on his brother. Finally, Ida had reapplied his blazer and collected his bags, making his way towards the door. Swiftly spinning on his heel, Ida put on another manufactured smile for Tensei. Goodbye, Tensei. I'll be back to see you soon. As he went to open the door, he was halted. You have that hero experience thing soon, right, Tenya? A pause. A shuffle. I do, yes. Okay. Well, good luck on it, and thanks for coming, little brother. Just don't do anything stupid. Bending his neck to look back at his idol, at his role model and the person who influenced his entire life and desire to become a strong and great hero, Ida told him the first lie he had ever uttered. I won't, Tensei. I hope you rest better tonight. Goodbye, brother. Goodbye, Tenya. Throwing open the door and storming out with renewed vigor, Ida collapsed as soon as he was out of sight. He deflated, his cogs and machinery slowing to a halt as he supported his malfunctioning body with the concrete walls of seclusion. His head was spinning, pounding even more than it was inside of Tensei's room. It was full of thoughts that stretched and breached the surface of his skull and brokered a fierce treaty of pain across his entire being. So many things swirled and swarmed his soft mind with poison and charms. So many things grew and embedded their glossy roots and tainted branches into his veins and arteries in the hope to drain his entire being of life and of reason. So many things pulled his body around. He was a puppet on the strings of his ideals. He felt unclean in his own skin, yet at the same time, Ida felt liberated. He felt free and unshackled by the same biology which once bound him. Lifting a fist to meet his eye line, Ida felt a surge of action and a rush of adrenaline rocket throughout his frame. Whatever convictions and whatever doubts he had were nullified and disintegrate by the sheer effect and divination of his exaltation. Ida's prize was concrete. It was finalized and cemented to the foundation of his bones and mixed eternally into his blood, where it could imbue and grant a fullness to his condition. Tenya Ida felt absolute and total clarity in his mental track. He was going to take down the hero killer, punish him for his neurotic and damnable actions, and then claim back a piece of his life, of Tensei's life. This was his design. Picking himself up off of his supports, the inner working of Ida's gadgetry began to spring back to life, and the automated metal man began to trail off into uncertainty, a haze of vengeance and wrath leaking from his twitching and breaking body of steel. Ida vowed to destroy the ideology of the hero killer, to wipe clean Stain from society. Yet the branches had grown deep, and his pride had become corrupt once more, pumping heartlessness through his bloodstream alongside victory. Ida had been poisoned by pride. On the other side of the solitary cage, Tensei sat bathed in silence. In the ex-hero's mind, something swarmed. He had witnessed something before Ida had left. He had seen something he had never wished to bear witness to. His little brother, the only person he ever wanted to look up to him and follow in his footsteps, was drenched in bloodlust and fury. Ida's face, contorted and bent into a snarl, pitted tooth against tooth in a grotesque and deadly machination of injury while his fists were clenched so tight they looked like snowfall on his knuckles. Yet it was the maelstrom that brewed in his eyes which concerned Tensei most of all. A whirlwind of hate and animosity grew and festered in the whites of Ida's eyes, decaying and devouring them until it left nothing but a husk of his younger brother's shining light, one which had been snatched and stolen to make way for his rage. Buried deep below all of that hatred sat sympathy and empathy, which was what Tensei feared the most. It meant that Ida wasn't fighting and rebelling for his own fate. Instead, he was fighting for Teeny Eye's robbed life. A sudden chilling fear overcame Tensei as he thought about the implications and consequences of this revelation. Looking over to the window side, he let out a shaky sigh into the frosty air. "Be safe, Ida, please be safe." Izuku understood pain. To him, pain was no longer the sinister monarch that ruled and reigned over the biology of his condition. It had no throne nor crown to build its standing upon or to command his actions from. After only having one for all for a few months, Izuku had managed to unshackle himself from the tyranny of pain, unbolt and free of his confines through sheer force of will and utter agony. He had the scars, the trophies and the mistakes from previous escape attempts and breaches of torment to showcase his devotion to the Empire, but now he had to carry those burdens past him. He had outgrown agony. Now, the physical strain of cracking a bone or splitting skin, the vast outpour of dripping blood or tearing sinew, was dwarfed to him. He had kissed agony and been bit by suffering so much that it was a trivial experience now. One Izuku felt more flustered by than one he dreaded. Despite this, the Quirk inheritor didn't revel in pain. He didn't wish it on others or wish to dive headlong into such a feeling. To Izuku Midoriya, the anatomy of pain was like being thrown into cold water. Icy, freezing, burning and suspenseful all at the same time, drowning in surprise and tension yet in a burst of relief. The strain begins to swim and float in a bed of contentment, all for the greater outcome. And if he needed to trade blows with injury and suffering in order to break free of more restraints, and to be greater than he ever could be on his own, then Izuku would take every hit head on. However, the cruelty about pain is that its branches don't just embed themselves into one person. Their nature is to suck the triumph from multiple hosts. And it was this fact why Izuku despised pain. Breaking out from his head, Izuku was brought back to reality by the wailing in the air and the wetness on his shirt. Glancing down at his chest, a mop of familiar green hair sat thumping itself against Izuku's body in rapid succession. Inko Midoriya, crying her eyes out into her son's chest. "Izuku, I was so worried. I thought why you might have died. Wah, it's okay mom, I'm fine see. Wah, my baby boy." Giving his mother a light smile as she still cried and sobbed into his chest, he watched on as her tears dropped and branched down his body, dripped and grew like leaves all over his pale flesh. Crystalline roots and flowers springing up everywhere from the cracks and fissures in his skin. Izuku's eyes specifically followed the twisting roots that trailed over his scars and laceration. These were his rewarding for indulging in pain. The grooves and curves in his hands were an eternal reminder of his partaking in agony. The constant act reminding Izuku of all the damage he's caused himself, and the pain that was then inflicted onto other people because of him. More specifically, to people like the crying woman in this arm. Wrapping his arms around her, Izuku felt a few of his own tears pool at his eyes and drop onto Inko's head. Why did his pain have to screw with the lives of other people? Why what he did with his body or his ambitions hurt those who cared about him? Why did the selfishness that lay in his heart, his desperate desire to become a hero, his fulfilled love and want to help people, have to in turn mess things up for a bunch of other people who are just on the sidelines? Sucking in his held breath, Izuku sighed and sniffled. "Hey Mo." Before he could utter another word, Izuku felt a fierce stinging hit strike his face. Wide-eyed he recoiled slightly, gasping with an open maw and crimson-skinned cheek. Before him, the shaken, whimpering form of Inko stood with columns of streaking tears that dripped and sprayed the floor, her eyes full of a flood of shame and embarrassment. Waterlogged freedom caging her eyes while a blazing fire of fury and maternal protection coated her entire being in the fires of motherhood. She stuttered and swayed as she spoke, drunk on her emotions and tears. "I'm so sorry Izuku, but I had to watch you. I each had to sit in our living room, in our house, watching you on our TTV as you beat yourself silly. I had to watch my son, my darling baby boy, break his body in and beat himself up not only once, but twice. I had to watch you, Izuku, stand up and destroy your body twice. And what was it for, huh? Tell me, what was worth you breaking yourself, Izuku? Stumbling forward into the setting sunlight, Inko leaned forward, took the streaming and tearful mess that was her son's face, and began to thumb his cheeks and his eyes and any piece of skin she could come across. She imbued her entire body and her entire soul into those touches, all the care and warmth she was able to exude from her being into those few precious moments. Please, Izuku, tell me. To that question, the UA student truly had trouble conjuring the words. Why had he done what he did? How did he summon up so much courage and energy to not only force Todoroki to accept his hatred and self-loathing the way he managed, but also to push past his own feelings of hatred and agonizing dystopia to continue fighting? What had helped him summon the strength and the reasoning to follow through with his preconceived goals, which, by all means, should have crashed and burned into cinders, only instead, resulting in cracked cartilage and an empowered spirit? An easy answer to his quandary would be the power fueled by One for All. He had seen the eyes and been resurrected to enact more, to push himself even further than he had gone before, to be plus ultra. Izuku couldn't refute this fact. However, it wasn't just that. Perhaps it was some sort of lust for combat that drove him, an underlying euphoria which set off his senses and caused him to lose himself in his quirk and the powers vested in him by his predecessors. Perhaps it was an in-the-moment kind of experience where he felt ethereal for a few fleeting moments, where each shot of pain was like a bullet of enlightenment and understanding to his fragile soul. Perhaps there was an even simpler answer to his question. I think it may have just been pride, Mom. Glancing up through his bleeding eyes, Izuku peered at the shaken form of his mother, her head quirked, and her eyes squinted. Pride? But you've never been a prideful person. I know. It was just that in that moment, surrounded by the crowds and all the heroes and all my classmates, and after witnessing what Todoroki could actually do and how powerful he was, I guess I just needed to prove myself. He really is just so strong, and I knew how strong he would be if he used the full extent of his quirk. I suppose I just wasn't really prepared for how strong he could be. And if he was going to use the full power of his quirk, then I was going to use the full power of mine, even if that meant I have to hurt myself. Peering down even further, a drop of liquid drifted from his eyes and splattered against the uneven, fleshy pavement of his scared hands, once again reminding him of the pain and agony he put himself through and the outcome of it. I'm really sorry to make you or anyone else worry. I never ever want to do that. But if I'm going to be a great hero like All Might, then I need to always fight at full power and go above 100% effort, no matter what. I need to learn how my quirk works and control it, and that is going to take time and effort and maybe even blood and sweat and tears. But Mom, I need to do this. I just need to. I've been given this power, it's a blessing I even got this power so late that now I have to catch up to everyone else. I am going to make you and everyone else proud. I'll do it. A moment of silence passed between the two. Then, the chubby hands of Inko shot up to wrap her son's head in her arms, shrinking to the floor with his head cradled in her arms. She began to stroke his unruly curls, massaging and going over his scalp as tears dropped and wetted his hair. Oh Izuku, I'm already so proud of you. I just want you to be safe and happy, okay? I don't like seeing you get hurt, but I'll try and push through it. But I need you to promise me that you'll try your hardest to get stronger without resorting to hurting yourself all the time. A sniffle and a dry chuckle lit up the air. I promise, Mom. I promise I'll try my hardest. Squeezing her son into a tight body lock, the pair openly wept at each other. A certain aura washed over them as they conveyed their care and emotional ties to one another. The shackles and confines of pain and torment that had been crushing and carrying the pair over the last several ties were suddenly shattered into dust below the might of a mother's love. Although Izuku understood why this happened, his pain, his suffering, that was the catalyst for this intervention. This cry for help and worry from the person he could consider himself closest to. For it was the scars that littered his body and the scars that littered his soul that forced Inko to go through this torment. This is what Izuku hated about pain. Pulling his face out of the crook of his mother's neck, Izuku spoke up. So, Mom? Inko pushed her watery face away from her son. What is it, Izuku? You know how I'm going on that hero experience course in a few weeks. Well, I need a new costume for it since I ruined my old one, so I thought that maybe why you could help me design it? A light Airy laugh danced through the skies. Of course, Izuku. However, I don't know if you really need my advice anymore. Well, you did really well designing the last one. So I thought if we worked on it together then maybe we could come to a middle ground maybe. Yes son. Now come inside before you catch cold. This was what Izuku hated about pain. And he was going to make sure he minimized the pain he dealt to others, one way or another. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible journey today. I hope you enjoyed exploring the fascinating what-if scenario of Deku. The possibilities were truly mind-blowing. If you found this video entertaining and thought-provoking, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel. Your support means the world to me and inspires me to bring you more captivating content in the future. Stay tuned for more exciting what-if stories and other amazing videos coming your way. Until next time, take care, stay curious, and keep embracing the power of imagination.